A Tuesday night in South Korea. The main television channel shows a popular chat show. The mood is as soft as the furnishings. Until the president breaks into the evening schedule and spoils it with a national address that shocks the nation.
친애하는 국민 여러분.
President Yoon declares martial law, putting the military in charge. He blames pro-North Korean opposition parties who make up the majority in parliament and who've been blocking his legislation, including a budget. Parliament in this building should now be suspended. But it's also the only body that can overrule the president and his martial law by voting against him. Cue a midnight dash for Parliament. First, the army. Heavily armed soldiers enter the back doors of the building. Others take a more direct route. And some need a little extra help. But opposition leaders have also summoned lawmakers and supporters to the National Assembly. This party boss live-streamed himself being chauffeured to Parliament before clambering over the gates. Inside, MPs and journalists scramble to get to the chamber. Outside the gates, the scuffles continue in a cloud of tear gas and a flash of cameras. Here, a member of Parliament is seen grabbing a soldier's gun, shouting, "Are you not ashamed?" Others remember the last time martial law was imposed in this country, before South Korea shook off military dictatorship to become one of the most prosperous and vibrant democracies in Asia. And what happens in South Korea has repercussions well beyond its borders. A short missile's flight away from Seoul is North Korea, where dictator Kim Jong-un rules his nuclear-armed dystopia with the constant threat of invasion of the South, now in political turmoil. There to stop the North from trying it on are 29,000 US troops in one of the biggest American bases overseas. They've been here since 1953, the end of the Korean War. What will happen to them after President Trump takes office? One of the many questions with regional implications. Back to tonight, back to Parliament. As the standoff continues, the opposition parliamentarians who've made it into the building vote against the martial law. The result is 190 to 0. The remaining 110 MPs who belong to the President's People's Party did not show up to vote. Many of them, by the way, were also against the imposition of martial law. In the dead of night, the soldiers are filmed returning to barracks. If the coup is indeed over, it lasted 2 hours and 48 minutes, half an hour longer than Parasite, Korea's Oscar-winning film, and almost as surreal. Well, let's take you live to Seoul, the South Korean capital, where we're joined by John Nielsen Wright, who's head of the Japan and Korea's program at the Center for Geopolitics at Cambridge University. Welcome to the program, John Nielsen Wright. Is it all over as far as you can tell?
It's too early to say, I'd say. I mean, it's reassuring to have seen the National Assembly vote so decisively to overturn the president's order. But we've had no clarification about the role of the military, and the president himself has been silent. The reassuring news is, of course, that the media continues to function. South Koreans are able to follow this story, but it is unquestionably a moment of, I think, acute tension. It should be noted that the leader of the president's party, the PPP, himself came out and said very decisively, this is unconstitutional. And there are demands for the president to resign or to be impeached and ultimately to be prosecuted.
I mean, you know the place well. Did this come out of the blue?
South Korean politics has always been very, very fractious, and it's got more fractious in recent years. And I think that's the clue to understanding why President Yoon has acted. I mean, he claimed that this is an attempt to deal with a threat from North Korea and its alignment with these progressive politicians. But the evidence for that is pretty much non-existent. President Yoon was facing pressure from a National Assembly that was wielding its legitimate democratic muscle to call for the impeachment of prosecutors who had been asked to investigate allegations of corruption, insider trading surrounding the president's wife, the First Lady. They decided not to proceed, and that was, I think, the spark, if you like, for the opposition politicians to demand that those prosecutors be impeached. Delays in budget approval, all of which had left the president feeling, I think, politically uninfluential and therefore cornered. And he's responded with this huge overreaction. History, I think, will judge him very harshly. But for now, we are in this standoff. And tomorrow, I expect we will see more protests by the public. South Koreans vote with their feet. And you remember back in 2016, the so-called candlelit protests against then President Park Geun-hye. South Koreans take their democratic rights very, very seriously.
And talking of that, I mean, the last time martial law was imposed was, I gather, more than half a century ago. Since then, South Korea has had this incredible transition to democracy, but also to amazing prosperity. It's the 10th richest country in the world, apparently. Of course, it has its soft power, the film Parasite, all that incredible K-pop music. So why has he done something that belongs to the dustbin of history? Why go so far?
Well, I think, President Yoon is not a conventional politician by any means, as this action so clearly demonstrates. His career was in the law, ironically. He was a special prosecutor appointed by the previous president, Moon Jae-in, to, if you like, clear up political corruption. The irony is, therefore, that he's now being charged with the very same type of offences that he was responsible for investigating before. Special prosecutors, however, have often been seen as something of a law unto themselves. And that reflects, if you like, what I would describe as Yoon's almost authoritarian temperament, which has inclined him to take this, I think, hugely mistaken step in calling for martial law. In all of this, of course, other countries look on with, I think, a sense of anxiety. And it remains to be seen how he is going to dig himself out of this impossible position.
Indeed, and what the implications are for the rest of the region. John Nielsen-Wright in Seoul tonight. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Well, the Biden administration says it is watching the developments in South Korea with great concern and very closely indeed. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, who's at the State Department. Siobhan, what are they saying over there?
Well, I have just stepped outside of the press conference here at the State Department, and South Korea was the main line of questioning. The spokesperson there said that the US was watching what was happening, the events, with grave concern. He said that the hope and the expectation is that any political disputes will be resolved peacefully and within the rule of law. He gave no further details, but he did reiterate that all-important fact that the US was not given any notice about what was to happen in South Korea earlier. Let's hear a clip from him now.
We were not notified of President Yoon's announcement in advance. Ultimately, at the crux of this is not, President Biden, President Yoon, these two specific governments. What this is about is the broader strategic relationship and the broader strategic partnership that we have with the Republic of Korea. And that alliance, as I said, is ironclad.
Well, this will no doubt be embarrassing for President Biden. He considers President Yoon to be a key strategic ally. He was asked earlier in Angola for any comment on what was going on. He said he didn't have any, but that he was being briefed on the situation. But make no mistake, what happens in South Korea really matters to the US. The two have a key strategic, economic and military ties. The Pentagon earlier confirming to us that it has 5 military bases in South Korea, housing some 28,500 troops. So these not just there, of course, to protect South Korea from any advances from the north, but also to ward against any threats from China in the region. So what is happening in South Korea really does matter to the people here in this building. And on that, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, we're told, is urgently seeking to speak to his counterparts today as soon as possible.
Siobhan, thanks very much indeed. Well, Dr. Sojin Lim is a reader in Asia-Pacific Studies at the University of Central Lancashire and an expert on both Koreas. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. It's a bit odd, isn't it, that the US, with almost 29,000 troops based in South Korea, providing these security guarantees, the close friendship, apparently, as we just heard from Siobhan, between both Presidents Biden and Yoon, that they had no idea that he was going to do this.
Oh, I think no one would have had this, the idea that he's going to do this, even in South Korea. And also the presidential office was very quiet. And the President Yoon didn't even inform the head of the National Assembly. So he, as the previous the interviewee mentioned, that himself from the background in law, but totally ignored the process and the procedure against the law. So this was really came out of blue, and that tells us that he was really in the place, the position that needed to find the radical route, and this was really miscalculated in a way.
What was this then? An extreme example of political impulsivity and frustration?
Yes, so actually, yes, he was frustrated in a way because of the recent scandal with his own wife, the First Lady, and the top level of the politicians in South Korea. It has been a while that the population in South Korea gathered and then protested and then demanded impeachment already. And if we see the statements to the last night in South Korea, the articles, and it clearly shows that he was frustrated with the recent demand by the population and public, and also he was frustrated with the recent conflict between the government and the medical members in the society. So all this tells us that he really wanted to solve out the problem with this martial law, but obviously it doesn't look like it worked out well.
South Korea has a bit of a tradition of locking up its ex-presidents. Do you think that that's where he's going to end up now? In jail?
Yeah, that's very sad. The sad story. Actually, I was talking about with my colleagues about that. Now another president will end up in prison. So the only president who didn't end up in prison would be the previous president who negotiated with the previous government. So this is very unfortunate. But it looks like he has no choice, but then will be impeached and then will prison because obviously he violated the law.
So North Korea, of course, just on the other side of the demilitarized zone, is watching this very closely. We know that recently the North Koreans wanted to sever any sort of physical links with South Korea, which alarmed a lot of people that they were thinking of an invasion at some stage and not a unification. What are the repercussions of this for this very explosive peninsula?
So even though there was this conflict escalation that was in narratives, and the Korea Peninsula has been there as a buffer zone between the power game between US and China, and North Korea, we actually didn't think that it will invade South Korea, but it will more try to negotiate with the U.S. And now having the President Trump as a new president in the United States, the North Korea wants to provocate more so that it can has the attention, and South Korea had to deal with it. But now the President Yoon expected that the President Trump will be very different from the Biden administration, and that also looked like worked as a factor that frustrated Yoon Suk Yeol, because he may need to change his direction completely differently from what he has imposed at the moment.
In one word, is South Korean democracy safe tonight, yes or no?
South Korean democracy, we are still developing, I think.
Okay.
And as a person who has lived outside of Korea, I think it is seeing the kind of catalytic moment, so that there will be a further development, and the population will realize that we can achieve that in a way that in this moment.
A work in progress, in other words. Seo-Jin Lim, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Okay, let's bring you an update on our top news story tonight. South Korea's president says he will move to lift the martial law declaration he imposed just a few hours ago after Parliament voted against the measure. Yoon Suk Yeol says the martial law command forces have now withdrawn and a cabinet meeting will be held as soon as possible.